Today, we celebrate the life of Catherine of Siena. She is hailed as a doctor of the Church, in other words, a great teacher. She is also the patron saint of Europe, of Italy, as well as Rome. In her life, she was associated with the third order of the Dominicans, the order of preachers. And being a third order, a tertiary, she never was cloistered and lived in a close community. But she lived nonetheless a remarkable life as an amazing reformer. And thanks to her, the papacy moved back from Avignon to Rome in a critical time of the history and life of the church. And her life and her works should help us to grow in our understanding of God and the scriptures. The first reading I would like to offer you from the lections is Acts chapter 8, verses 1b to 8. And there arose on that day a great persecution against the church in Jerusalem. And they were scattered throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria, except the apostles. Devout men buried Stephen and made great lamentation over him. But Saul was ravaging the church and entering house after house. He dragged off men and women and committed them to prison. Now those who were scattered went about preaching the word. Philip went down to the city of Samaria and proclaimed to them the Christ. And the crowds, with one accord, paid attention to what was being said by Philip when they heard him and saw the signs that he did. For unclean spirits, crying out with a loud voice, came out of many who had them, and many who were paralyzed or lame were healed. And so there was much joy in that city. The second reading comes from John's Gospel, chapter 6, verses 35 to 40. Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me shall not hunger, but whoever believes in me shall never thirst. I say to you that you have seen me and yet do not believe. All that the Father gives me will come to me, and whoever comes to me I will never cast out. For I have come down from heaven not to do my own will, but the will of him who sent me. And this is the will of him who sent me, that I should lose nothing of all that he has given me, but raise it up on the last day. For this is the will of my Father, that everyone who looks on the Son and believes in him should have eternal life, and I will raise him up on the last day. The central theme I would like to focus on is those words of Jesus that he says that whoever the Father gives to me, I will never lose. Within that is already an indication of the Reformed doctrine of the preservation of the elect. But even more than that is this revelation of the faithfulness of God's character. It doesn't matter the craziness of the crisis that we are facing right now. We can have hope that there's joy and happiness on the other side. But how? How does Jesus make sure that he doesn't lose the ones that the Father has given to him? Well, it seems that he gives that answer when he says, in that passage, starting off with one of the 7 I am sayings in John's Gospel. And he says, I am the bread of life. The bread of life, that evokes this understanding of the emptying of himself within the mission of God, the kenosis in the Missio Dei, which we of course celebrate so vividly in the Eucharist. There is of course clear parallels between the bread of life that comes down from heaven with the Old Testament, particularly of manna given to the Israelites in the desert on their way to the Promised Land. This giving of manna is typically associated in the Judaic theological tradition of the giving also of the Torah, the law, which is the wisdom of God that shows forth the optimal way to live life that leads to salvation, happiness, and righteousness. And the Torah and the wisdom of God should lead us to this place of, ultimately, of rest, of the Sabbath, which is clearly showed in the desert, how God traveled with his people and how God has set the pace. If we want to enter into that rest, we need to follow the principle of not following or living our life according to our own pace or someone else's, but God's. In the letter to the Hebrews, the writer talks about this, and he says, "Do not harden your hearts as at Meribah, but strive to enter that rest in Jesus Christ." The inverse can also be explained in that Jesus is on his way to Jericho, and along the way he finds a blind man called Bartimaeus who cries out, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And as Jesus stops, he gives him deliverance and healing and salvation. There's also the reference of the Sabbath in an account in Mark's Gospel where Jesus is traveling on the Sabbath day with his disciples and a group of other people. And these disciples pluck heads of grain and they eat it like a snack. The Pharisees ask Jesus, "But why are your disciples laboring on the Sabbath day?" And Jesus responds saying that the Sabbath is made for people. People are not made for the Sabbath. And he goes on to say that you don't pour new wine into old wineskins, but new wine into new wineskins. So there's a change, there's a development happening. And as it were, I would say an exchange. And it's particular in this time of our lives. There's an exchange from nihilism, where there's a seemingly meaninglessness to our existence, to a hope and a future. And this is where Catherine's ministry was so potent, because she said to the church that you need to exchange your mental pragmatism for truly believing, similar to Jesus' words. Because there's one thing to say that you are a Christian and to be able to mentally argue for it, and quite another to live a life that is both the gospel in word and in deed. Because a fruitless Christianity is a dead religion. And so as we strive to give Jesus, the bread of life, to people, it is the ultimate satisfaction, the most intimate longing of their hearts. All our questioning, all our longing, all our searching in life can find its satisfaction in Jesus. The second part of the gospel that Philip so beautifully shows us is that there's an amazing power in forgiveness and reconciliation. He goes to the Samaritans, a group of people that were rejected and despised by the Jews, and he gives them this answer to their questions, that whilst others have rejected them, God has not. And so within this process of proclaiming the gospel, we see that there's a clear compatibilism between God's sovereignty and our responsibility. And as we engage with this world that's in devastation, we look at the life of Jesus, of Philip, and of Catherine, and we see how they were able to go to the ones whose are gods and to give them a sense of meaning and a purpose in life by offering them the very longing and satisfaction of their hearts, Jesus Christ. Amen.